Welcome to this QuizCon webinar. My name is Peter Baddeley. The topic of today's webinar is the QuizCon Print and Scan app for SharePoint. I will show you how these apps can streamline the process of scanning documents into SharePoint and printing items from SharePoint. I will be using Office 365 for my demonstration today, but the apps are also available in on-premises deployments. On screen, you can see some documents in a library within a SharePoint site. I'm going to start with showing you the Scan app. So I'm going to go ahead here, and you'll see I've already installed the QuizCom Scan app and the Print app already into my system. So you can see here that I've got a Scan document option, and I've also got a Print option added to my ribbon. So I'm going to kick off by scanning some documents in there. And so when I click on the Scan document option, this will load up a window, and I get a few options presented to me as a user to how I want to scan. And I'll go through each of these in turn. I'm going to just start off with just a quick scan. I've already got a document sitting on my scanner and I just want to scan it straight in. I'm not worried about the settings. I don't want to manipulate what's going to be scanned or anything like that. I just want to scan using sort of all the default settings and give me no particular dialogues or options to choose from, just to really show you how quickly you can scan a document in. So I'm going to hit quick scan, and what this is going to do is it's going to produce me a PDF file based on the file which I want to scan in, the document which I want to scan in, and that will upload it straight into my document library. So I don't need to go through a process of scanning and storing the file locally and then having to upload that to SharePoint, or any of the sort of manual steps which I would have to do previously. And you can see here that there's a file loaded into the system, and if I click on that, there's a PDF file which has been scanned straight into the system. I'll show you some of the additional settings which you can see when you do a scan. So if I launch a new scan, and as an administrator, you can define what settings and options people will have the ability to change. So I'm actually going to use the Edit Settings and Scan. I can see here that I've got a number of file types which I can select to output my scan document. And if I was scanning multiple files, so if I had multiple pages in my scan, I could choose whether that produces a single file or just multiple files for each page, depending on how I want the scan to work. I might be scanning a number of invoices in, and that would flow through and scan out and produce multiple documents. Alternatively, I might have a single document which I'm scanning in, but it's got multiple pages, so I only want one document created inside of SharePoint. I've got a few other options here about the file name, which we'll talk about a little bit later, as well as being able to overwrite existing documents and show preview. So I hit scan here, and what this will load is this QuizCom client, where I can actually see what the scan is doing. So when you first use the scan app, you'll have to install a little component, which is this scan client, so it actually runs on your machine to actually perform the scan and interfaces with your scanner. So you can see here is my file which has been scanned in. I can see my scanner listed here. If I've got multiple scanners, I can choose to pick which specific scanner I want to work with. I can manipulate the image which has been scanned in. So I can do things like select it. I can rotate it. So potentially if it didn't come in the right way, I can rotate that. If there's maybe it's not quite scanned right, or there's some bits which you don't want scanned as part of that image, then I can choose here under the image option to adjust it. So I can crop it, I can manipulate the brightness or contrast. So let's maybe just sort of crop it, and maybe there's a little bit of black space here where the scan wasn't quite perfect, and I'll adjust the scan accordingly. I can do various other options here. If I've got files which I want to import, then I can, if I've got some images which I want to include, which have been maybe scanned separately or something else like that, I could add those images in. Whatever I want to do. I can manage the profiles of my scanner here as well. So you can see here I've got one of my scanners already set up. And I won't spend too long on the settings for this scanner, but you can see here I've got various options about the setup of my scanner. Obviously, you need to have a scanner installed or have access to a scanner within your network. And once you've finished manipulating how you want your scan to look, you can then just choose Save. And it will process in the same way which we saw when we did a quick scan. So the quick scan is really for people who want to do some, don't want to think about what they're choosing, what options they're setting, whereas a full scan with all the settings gives you a lot more options about what you apply. Also, if you choose that option, that's going to present you with the metadata screen, so the property screen. So that will, if you've got metadata columns on your document library, this is the option which will actually present those, so you can set them at the point of completing the scan. So I'll go in here and I'll select a specific document category because that's what I've set on my library, but whatever columns you would set on your library, they would also be shown. So I'm going to hit save, and you can see that that one's come in, that scan has come in there. Obviously the standard metadata around who it was and when it happened, but also the category being set. So fairly straightforward, but if I choose the option to actually set some of the settings around the scan, I get some options as I progress through. You saw some options which appeared when I launched into the scan around things like file names and file types. You can let users set those when you actually do the scan, but you can also let set some of those as an administrator. So let me show you how you do some of those. Within site contents in my site, you'll see that the QuizCom Scan app is installed. If I go into that app, this will take me to the settings screen for that site. You can see at the top here that you can make inherit settings from the site collection. In this case, I've unticked that so that these settings are specific to my site. You can also apply scan settings specific to a document library. So different document libraries can have different naming conventions, for example. You see here that I've got the option to auto-generate file name, and there's a little helper here to explain some of the tokens which you can use. So things like date, time, user of the file type. So I see here that I've got my date and time token, and I'm just sort of prefixing that with the word scan. So if I go in there and change that to webinar, when I next do the scan, it will scan with that different file name. It's important to maybe use things like date or time so you don't get duplicate file names coming in, or you're going to have to educate users to sort of name files appropriately. I've got the option here to say whether I want to overwrite existing documents or not, set things like default file output for my scan, and also certain restrictions. So do I allow users to select the scan mode? Do I allow users to do a multi-document scan? Compress large files before upload, which is quite a nice feature. So if I'm producing very large scan documents, I can compress those down into a zip file. And if I tick that option, I can define how large the file is before I compress that down. I'm going to leave those settings as it is, just with my alternative file name. So I'm going to hit save on those settings. And that will navigate me back to my site. Those settings are now saved. If I go back to my document library, I'll do a new scan and show you that some of those new settings, but I'll also show how we can work with a sort of multi-page scan. So I'm just going to hit scan document again. And I'm going to go edit settings and scan. You'll notice here that it's changed my file name format already based on those settings which I've applied. And I'm going to produce one file because I only want one file for my output, even though I'm scanning in multiple pages. So I'm going to hit scan. Now, to save time in this webinar, I've already sort of got these scans which I want to use as images. So I'm just going to add the extra images into my scan window here. So you see I've got 3 additional pages from a QuizCom user guide. I can remove certain pages from the scan if I want to. I can reorder these if I want to, just by dragging and dropping these around on the page. I can also do things like OCR. So we've got text within these documents. If I select OCR here, I get the option here to make PDF searchable using OCR. It defaults to an English language, but there's a lot more languages which you can install if you're working in different languages or scanning files with different languages in. You can add those in. I'm going to hit OK here. I'm going to leave that as it is, and I'm going to hit save. This will take a couple more seconds to save because I've got several pages to scan in. You'll notice that it's already starting to set the specific file name change with webinar in front of what I'm setting. Once again, it will show me the property screen to set a specific property for my document. So I will say that this is a contract, and I will hit save. So you can see there that one's been added at the bottom of the screen. If I click on that, that will open up a PDF with multiple pages. If I do a quick search and search for user guide, you can see there it's picked that up. So it's using the OCR to actually be able to search the text within that scan. Okay, so fairly straightforward, nice and easy to use, very friendly for end users. There's not lots of extra steps, but there's also some more advanced options available if people have some slightly more complex requirements around scanning. Let's move on to the print app now. So I've got a number of documents already in my document library. So let's select one of these documents, in this case this document, and I'll go to Files and Print. So because the print app is installed, that option is available on the ribbon. So if I hit print here, this will open a little sort of print window where I get some options to define certain things about my print. So I can see there's various things about page sizing and other things like that. But let's just show you how the print functionality works, and we'll dive into some of those other options in a second. So I get the option for a preview here. If I click that, it will just show me a preview of what I'm about to print. So very much like printing in Word or something else like that, I get a print preview. And then if I click print here, that will open up the print client on my computer and start a print. Now, because we're doing a webinar, I could print these off, but there wouldn't be much point in doing that because you wouldn't actually be able to see what I'm doing. Let's see and have a look at something a little bit more complicated. So let's take a couple of documents. So say I want to print 2 documents. I can do that, and if I hit print, again looking at this window, I wanted to point out this area where it gives me the option around what to print. So do I just want to print the documents? Do I want to include any properties around those documents? So do I want to display the metadata properties on my print as well? Or do I just want to print the metadata properties? I'm just going to leave it as documents. If I hit preview again, this will take a couple of seconds because these are quite long documents, but what it will do is it will actually show you a preview, and it's actually showing you a preview of both documents. Now, in a print scenario, that would just run through and print off both of those documents. Alternatively, you can choose the option to download it as a PDF. So if you've got maybe multiple documents and you want to merge those together into a single PDF file, you can do that as well. So here I see a preview of my document, and if I scroll through a few pages, you can see that it's going to be printing both of those documents. And if I choose to download it as a PDF, just save that and open it. Here you see in Adobe, it's created a PDF with both files. So a great way of being able to output documents either for printing or to create PDFs. Okay, fantastic. We're not just restricted to printing documents, we can print other content within SharePoint. I'm sure you've come across those requirements where people want to print off bits of SharePoint. One of my favorite ones is the ability to print pages. So here's a page which has been written within SharePoint, and I get that same print option. So I can go off and print my page. I could create a PDF from it if I wanted to. And if I hit preview, you can see it's created that page to be printed off. Notice a few things. It's picked up the images and tables and other formatting which I've got within my page. But I've also set a custom header to be set. So within the settings for QuizCom Print app, I can set certain things like headings or watermarks or other things like that. So if I go into site contents in the same way which I showed you within the Scan app, the Print app has specific settings. Again, they can be settings for your site or your specific library. So I had applied specific settings to my pages library. I'm now going to just set some settings for my site as a whole, so the other libraries and lists within my site. You can see I get the option to set specific headers and footers. If I go into headers and footers, there's some nice options around being able to include certain fields and options. So things like current date and time, user, total number of pages. If you're in a specific list or library, you can also use fields from that list or library and put them either in the header or the footer. I want to show you a watermark here. So let's say I want to make sure that before anything is printed in my site that I'm going to include a watermark which says confidential. And if I go back to my document library now, and go and pick a specific file. So let's pick this file here and go print. And if I just look at the preview for that now, this will then watermark my documents with whatever I've defined. And that text and the formatting of it, the size, is entirely configurable on a site-by-site basis or even a document library by document library basis. So you can see there that it's put confidential as a watermark across my document. Okay, one last thing to show you. We can also print items. So if we've got items in our list, we can choose to print them. So if I navigate, for example, to a task list, I can go and select one or more tasks and choose to print them. So every piece of content is printable. Or even nicer in scenarios of using multiple of the QuizCom apps. If anyone's using QuizCom Forms, which is a form customization tool for SharePoint, either online or on premises, then you can build up quite complex forms. You can see here I've got a few different cases available to me. I can go in and look at the presentation of those cases. I can format them. I can put all sorts of validation around those cases. Do things like repeating rows and other things like that. I'm not going to dive too much into the capability here, but you can build quite rich forms sitting on top of standard SharePoint lists. When I print those, that print app is working with those custom forms. So I can do a lot around the presentation of that print. So I can print and include custom headers, including fields from my item. So in this case, I'm including the ID of my case. It's reflecting the presentation and the layout of my form. So it's a nice way to be able to print out that item if you need to. So a nice rich way to print things. There's also options when we're printing an item to just print the properties, so the fields in my list, or to be able to include attachments. So if you've got attachments attached to the item, it will also print those attachments as well as the data about the item you're printing. The nice thing is if you're using QuizCom Forms Enterprise, that includes the print app as well. So something to bear in mind if you're doing things with forms, is to actually use the print app as part of that. Alternatively, you can buy both the print and scan app separately. Thank you for watching this webinar recording. If you require any further support from QuizCom, you can contact them using the details shown on screen.